Hey everyone, welcome to my very first full-length comic book review. This one will be on Identity Crisis by Brad Meltzer and Rags Morales. Now, as a precursor to the actual review itself, I wanted to let you guys know that one, I will not be giving you guys any spoilers on the book. If you're looking for those, please go pick up the book. I promise you will not be sorry. Two, I usually throw up a lot of pictures with the audio, but this time I'm not going to, and that is because I really don't want to get my ass sued. By showing you guys a bunch of panel art, I don't want to run into any copyright issues, and I don't have enough money to fight a lawsuit from DC. So please bear with me. So with that in mind, let's get this ball rolling. The book starts off with two heroes on a stakeout, and one of them is talking about his relationship with his wife. It is a very strong conversation. He's talking about how when he may not be the strongest member of the Justice League or even the most recognized member of the Justice League, but his wife has loved him either way, even in the presence of Superman and Hal Jordan and the Flash and Batman. She's only ever had eyes for him. And you know what? That really sets up a great marriage. But the thing is, doom is kind of looming over the entire scene, and it's set up in direct conflict with them being on a stakeout. So then tragedy befalls the Justice League. Now, I'm not going to tell you exactly what happens and to who, but it's not really to one of the heroes. The tragedy befalls someone close to one of the heroes. And yes, they are killed. And it's really, really hard to watch. I mean, Rags Morales does a great job of evoking a lot of emotion in these still frames. But we see just a hurt. And the thing is, it ripples outward to the entire Justice League. It's really not just this one hero that is affected. It's all of them, because they all realize that they too have loved ones, and if they were to ever be put in jeopardy to this degree, they would fall apart just the same. This is then succeeded by a very powerful funeral scene, and I think Rags Morales had a little bit of help on this splash page that he did. There's a 2-page splash page of the entire funeral. It's not one of those that you just kind of glance at and then turn the page over. This is one, even though there is absolutely no dialogue on it that I can recall anyway, it's one that you really need to take a look at. It's one that you can't help but just sit and look and try and name off everybody that you see in the church pews. It's not them just standing there looking solemn. All of them have their very specific individual tasks. Some of them are consoling, some of them are crying, some of them are conversating, some of them just look worried. It's a really great splash page, and it really makes you stop, and maybe it interrupts the pacing of your reading, but it really would benefit your overall consumption of this book to stew with that image for 2 seconds. Now, the funeral scene is a scene that you just don't feel like you get to see very often. It's not one of those scenes that you see very often in a comic book, and when you do see it, it really makes you stop and go, wow, there is true gravity and repercussions to the actions of these heroes. These guys are not your Silver Age comic book heroes anymore. These are guys that live in the postmodern, which I'd say the postmodern started with the 2000s, postmodern comics, and these guys deal with real world issues. Now, yeah, maybe this is something that we saw with someone like Spider-Man, but these are consequences that these guys are dealing with, and to lose somebody that you love and that is close to you, it's not like the death of Gwen Stacy. This is a truly heart-wrenching funeral scene. And when the loved one of the dearly departed comes up to make his speech or his eulogy, he can't do it. And if you've ever been to a funeral where somebody has lost someone tragically, it wasn't of natural causes, but it was a tragic loss, to give that eulogy is a hard thing to do. And sometimes it's even harder to watch. You feel as a spectator that is just a very hard thing to watch, and you can't help but just want to go up and console them. Identity Crisis hits it on the head. So Brad Meltzer, he really makes you feel for this character, and it's one that I really had no prior knowledge of. It's not that I didn't know he existed, but it's one that I actually never read in a comic book before, and he instantly made him somebody that I love and adore. Anyway, we move forward to that, and after the funeral, there's kind of a secret society of Justice League members who already think that they know who did this, while the rest of the Justice League is out trying to find the culprit and the murderer. There's a select few members that already believe that they know who did it, and they're kind of conspiring in what looks to be kind of like a dungeon of the church. I don't know, maybe the basement of the church. It's not a comfortable setting. When we find out exactly why they believe this one villain did it, we get a flashback, and this flashback is probably the most controversial scene of the entire book. It's actually what made me pick up the book in the first place. Now, I had never read this, but online I was debating with this guy about certain issues being tackled and not being tackled in comic books. He specifically said that this adult-themed issue should not be tackled in comic books. It's not something that superheroes should concern themselves with. It's just a little bit too heavy a dose of reality. And while I respectfully disagreed, it piqued my interest and it sought a lot of intrigue in me. So I had to go up on the next Wednesday and pick up Identity Crisis and read this. So this moment really is the crux of the entire book. Now, the dearly departed person who had passed away in the first issue, we find out that she was also a victim of another crime. Now, you guys may be able to deduce exactly what I'm talking about, but just in case, I'm going to leave it somewhat vague. Now, this villain performed a horrible act on this woman, and now it's not graphically shown, it's sort of tasteful. I shouldn't use the word tasteful. It is shown in a way that lets your imagination do a lot more of the walking than the actual art itself. It's kind of like in a movie when you see someone put a gun to a head and then you hear a gunshot. Your mind will take that and interpret it, and you will, in your mind's eye, kind of see that person's head being blown off while not explicitly being shown. Now, the dialogue coupled with this imagery really makes it a hard thing to watch, to read. It's one of those moments that really, really just kind of makes you almost ashamed to even be human, because you know that there is an ugly side of human nature. And that, human nature, good and bad, that's why we have good and evil, good guys, bad guys, heroes, villains. To see it drawn out on a page for you where you can actually, in real time, pause yourself on any specific one panel and just think to yourself how horrible it is, it hurts a little bit. But at the same time, that powerful imagery, that powerful notion of evil, it's what keeps you reading. And I don't believe at all that this was added for shock value. I believe that it was added because heroes aren't just dealing with super crime, because you got guys like Green Arrow who don't have any real superpowers, but they're out there and they're fighting crime. They're combating it the best way that they know how. And sometimes that's your corner drugstore mugging, or it's your occasional back alleyway assault. And sometimes it's something like this. And it shows you that heroes cannot prevent every tragedy. They can't fight everything. They can be there to stop the world from ending, but they can't be there to stop all the small tragedies that befall everybody. And I think that's one of the fallacies of superheroes in the first place. And it's something that Identity Crisis addresses really well. After that, we're really faced with what catapults the rest of the story, and that is what happens when the heroes walk in on this happening. What do they decide to do with this villain? Obviously, killing is against their moral code, but they do throw that notion around. They throw the idea around. But what they decide to do instead is where a lot of people also get angry with this book. Now, I'm not going to tell you exactly what happens, but they basically are at a crossroads and they think, okay, well, we can stop him from ever doing this again, not by just locking him up, but by doing something else, and we can save countless innocent lives, or we can just lock him up, hope he doesn't break out again, and do the same thing all over to people. So when you're faced with such a dilemma, with such a challenge, what do you do? What is the right thing? Well, according to the black and white code of superheroes, lock him up and hope he doesn't ever escape. But is that really preventing crime, or is that just stalling the inevitable? So these select few members all decide, I don't think it was a unanimous vote, as I recall it wasn't a unanimous vote, they decide they'd take the left instead of the right, perform something on him that hopefully means he'll never do this to anybody else again. This is where it kind of sows the seeds of dissent amongst the ranks of the Justice League. Now, paralleling this story is also the B story, which is the killer of the woman in the beginning seems to be targeting loved ones of other beloved heroes, sending out menacing threats and things like that. So while the heroes are all busy looking for whoever killed the person from the beginning, they're also struggling with the fact, well, do I look for them or do I stay home with my loved ones and protect them the best way I know how? But that's, like I said, that is your B story that's kind of running parallel to the Secret Society of Justice League members who kind of performed this unspeakable act, so to say. It's unspeakable because I don't want to spoil it for you. Anyways, all the heroes seem to have their own tie-ins to this story, or from what I hear anyway. I haven't picked them up. I believe that this is an isolated story that you can read without having to bother with any other tie-ins. But each hero seems to have their own story throughout this, and I'm not going to give you the skinny on what everybody's doing. We're going to fast track past all the minutia of the story and get right down to the nitty-gritty of it all. So we find out when one of the Justice League members who was on the outs of this whole conspiracy ends up finding out what the other Justice League members did and calling out on their bullshit. And then what we find out is not only was this act performed on the villain, but it was also performed on one other hero as well. And there is an interesting exchange here where I'll just say Green Arrow is talking to Wally West Flash, and they're talking about, how did they not know, and blah, blah, blah. And they're talking about, well, people only hear what they want to hear. People only know what they want to know. And what they do is they show a picture of Superman, and Superman's talking to someone, but the way he's facing and the way it's drawn, it's like even Superman is overhearing this conversation now as Green Arrow and Flash have this conversation, and he's still not acknowledging it. In the sense that Superman, one of the most pure heroes of all time, has been turning a blind eye to some of these injustices that heroes have been performing because he knows it's a necessary evil. So that's where we start to really get into the sticky gray areas of superheroics and just exactly what that entails. To be a superhero, we're starting to learn through this book and through many others that have come since that being a superhero is not just about being right or wrong. It's not clear cut and dry, because the laws can only be followed to such a certain extent before you need to decide what's right for you and what's right for someone else. There's always those extenuating circumstances where you cannot allow somebody to do something else. So to see that Superman had turned a blind ear to something like this was really impactful to me. And as much as I couldn't believe it, I actually liked it because it brought Clark down to a level of us humans again. And that's what Brad Meltzer's done the entire run, is he's brought these larger-than-life characters down to a very human level. And when you get to see that, when you get to see people parading around in costumes with all these superpowers, they seem larger than life. They seem to be without troubles. Yeah, they've got their own personal demons, but they've got their life in order enough to be able to police the rest of the world. When you get to see that even they don't have all the answers, even they're not sure exactly what to do, it makes for a really enjoyable read. I really like deconstructing the superhero genre. They make for some of my favorite stories. Yeah, of course, I like to see the good guy overcome the bad guy, justice above villainy, all that good stuff. But sometimes you really need to see the flawed hero. Sometimes you really need to see them struggling and having a hard time doing what they're doing. So then we get to a couple other B-story plots where people are targeted and, some people die, and then we find out who the killer is. And the killer is one of the most unsuspecting people that I saw coming. This was not ruined for me, and I'm not going to ruin it for you. When we find out the motivations behind the killer, it really just speaks to human greed and human nature again. And it all kind of boiled down to this one line that Meltzer repeated over and over, is who benefits? Who benefits? And just to even ask that question, the question of who benefits, again, speaks to human greed. People are doing these things, committing heinous acts out of greed, because that is human nature. Whether you decide to fight it or indulge in it, that is human nature. Of course, there are plenty of other things too, but human greed is really ugly, and we see the ugliest sides of greed you can ever possibly imagine in this book. It's a great read. But when we find out who the killer is and the confession that we get, it almost made too much sense, and it made you think, man, I should have seen that coming. I wish I would have seen that coming, but at the same time, you're glad you didn't. After we get the killer's confession, the killer is put away. More people are hurt by the confession of this than maybe even the actual deaths and murders themselves. And that's an interesting thing to think about too, because death is a tragedy. Death is tragic. Death is hard to cope with. But when you find out the reasons behind a tragic death, it's almost a harder pill to swallow than the actual death itself. Meltzer really, really hit it on the nail here. And then we fast forward to the ending. Now, I guess the one complaint I have with this book is it did feel a bit anticlimactic. Once we find out who the killer is and the killer's taken care of, it all seems to just kind of quickly snowball to the bottom of the hill, and it's over. Once we get to the end, it is probably one of the saddest things I have ever seen in all of comic books. I don't want to spoil too much for you guys, but the person from the very beginning who dealt with the very first loss of the book is having a very hard time coping with it, to the point of denial. To see that played out, a superhero, mind you, probably the most pure of hearts superheroes that I can think of because of this book, is having such a hard time dealing with his loss that he's in complete denial of it. And it really fades to black on one of the saddest things that you could possibly ever read in a comic book. Yeah, Identity Crisis is not a feel-good, beat-em-up romp. It's nowhere near that, but it is something that I believe is worth checking out, is worth reading. If you're a DC Comics fan, this is probably a must-read. Now, I don't have a very extensive DC Comics collection. I have a good-sized collection. I mostly read Flash, Batman, and Green Lantern, but this was a book that I didn't really have any prior knowledge of. There was nothing that preceded it that I felt I needed knowledge of, and there's nothing afterwards or any tie-ins that I feel are absolutely necessary to read. It's a self-contained book. It's a book that I had a great time reading. I read it cover to cover. I couldn't put this thing down. Please, if you guys are at all interested in this review, please go pick it up. If you've read it before, please comment down below and let me know what you thought. How did my review do? Did I leave out something that you thought I should touch on? Let's talk about this below. And as always, guys, please like and share, and please hit that subscribe button. I know my review is probably a little anticlimactic, just like the book. I'm sorry, guys, but that's about all I have for you today. Please be on the lookout for our weekly poll and our Daredevil spoiler review coming this weekend. Thanks, guys.